Comment below where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories like this one. My name is Margaret, and I'm 59 years old. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. My husband had passed, my daughter had chosen her husband over me, and I was living in a weekly motel wondering how I'd become invisible. But sometimes life has a way of reminding you that being underestimated is actually your greatest advantage. What happened next changed everything. When my husband Robert died of pancreatic cancer last spring, the world felt like it stopped spinning. We'd been married for 32 years. He was my anchor, my best friend, the one person who always made me feel like I mattered. After the funeral, our house in Pflugerville felt too big, too quiet, too full of memories I wasn't ready to face. My daughter Amanda and her husband Derek offered to let me stay with them temporarily while I figured things out. Amanda seemed genuine about it, but Derek had this way of looking at me like I was a problem he was being forced to solve. Still, I was grateful. I had nowhere else to go. Their apartment in North Austin was small, but they cleared out their home office for me. I tried to be the perfect house guest. I cooked dinner most nights, kept my space immaculate, offered to babysit their neighbors' kids for extra money. I was desperate to prove I was worth the space I was taking up. But Derek made it clear I was a burden. He'd sigh loudly when I asked to use the kitchen. He'd turn up the TV when I was on phone calls. Once, I overheard him telling Amanda that having me there was killing the vibe, and that I needed to get my act together and move on. Amanda would defend me, but weakly. She's grieving, Derek. She just needs time, but I could see the strain in her eyes, too. She was caught between her loyalty to me and keeping peace with her husband. The end came on a Tuesday night in September. I'd made Derek's favorite meal, beef stroganoff, and set the table with their good plates. I thought maybe a nice dinner would help us all reset. Instead, it became the night that changed everything. Derek pushed his food around his plate, barely eating. Amanda was scrolling through her phone. The silence was suffocating. Finally, Derek set down his fork and looked at me directly. "Margaret, we need to talk about your situation here." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this isn't working anymore. You've been here 4 months, and honestly, it's time to make other arrangements." I looked at Amanda, waiting for her to jump in, to defend me, to remind Derek that I was still grieving, still looking for work, still trying to rebuild my life. And instead, she avoided my eyes. "Derek's right, Mom," she said quietly. "We all need space to heal. Maybe you could look into some senior communities. There are nice places that aren't too expensive. Senior communities. At 59. Like I was some elderly person who needed to be put away. I've been applying for jobs every day," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The insurance money from your father won't last forever, but it's covering my expenses." "I'm not asking for financial help," Derek scoffed. "It's not about money, Margaret. It's about independence. You're depending on us for housing, for social interaction, for everything. That's not healthy for anyone." The words hit like slaps. I stood up slowly, my hands trembling. "I see." "Mom, please don't be dramatic," Amanda said. "We're not kicking you out. We're just saying maybe it's time to take the next step." But I was already walking to my room. I packed my 2 suitcases in silence, trying not to cry where they could hear me. 32 years of marriage, 29 years of being Amanda's mother, and it had come to this, being asked to leave because I was inconvenient. Amanda knocked on my door as I was zipping up my second suitcase. "Mom, you don't have to leave tonight. We can work out a timeline." I turned to look at her. My only child, the little girl I'd rocked to sleep, taught to ride a bike, cheered for at every soccer game and school play. "No, Amanda. I understand completely. I won't impose any longer." She started crying then, but she didn't ask me to stay. That first night in the Red Roof Inn off Highway 183, I thought I'd hit rock bottom. The room smelled like industrial cleaner and stale cigarettes. The heater rattled all night. But I was wrong about rock bottom. Rock bottom came 3 weeks later when my debit card was declined buying groceries, and I realized I'd been spending my insurance money faster than I thought. I'd been applying for jobs, but the market was brutal for someone my age with a 20-year gap in employment. I'd stayed home to raise Amanda, then helped Robert with his small accounting practice. On paper, I looked unemployable. The motel manager, Mrs. Chen, was kind enough to let me work in exchange for reduced rent. I cleaned rooms, did laundry, handled the front desk during slow periods. It wasn't much, but it kept me afloat. Amanda texted occasionally. Short messages. Thinking of you. Hope you're doing okay. I always responded warmly, but inside I was drowning. My daughter had chosen her husband's comfort over her mother's stability, and I couldn't understand how I'd raised someone capable of that. 2 months into my motel life, something happened that changed my perspective entirely. Mrs. Chen asked me to clean out a room where a long-term tenant had passed away. Harold Morrison, an elderly man who'd lived there for 3 years. He had no family, and the county was handling his affairs. As I cleaned, I found a manila envelope tucked behind his dresser. Inside were documents, bank statements, investment records, and a handwritten note addressed to whoever finds this. Harold had been living modestly in that motel room while sitting on nearly $400,000 in savings and investments. The note explained that he'd been estranged from his family for years over a bitter divorce, and he'd been too proud and stubborn to reach out before it was too late. That's when it hit me. I wasn't the first person to end up in that place feeling forgotten and worthless, but unlike Harold, I still had time to change my story. I spent the next week researching. I learned about investment accounts, about how compound interest worked, about real estate markets. I realized that my insurance payout, still substantial despite my spending, could be leveraged if I was smart about it. More importantly, I realized something about power. All my life, I'd derived my sense of worth from taking care of other people. I'd never considered that my value might come from taking care of myself. I started small. I opened a high-yield savings account and moved most of my remaining insurance money there. I researched financial advisors and found one who specialized in helping widows rebuild their finances. Her name was Patricia Wong, and she became my first real teacher in independence. "You're not starting over, Margaret," she told me during our first meeting. "You're starting smart." Patricia helped me understand my financial position. With careful planning and strategic investments, I could build a stable foundation. But more than that, she taught me to think differently about money, not as something to fear running out of, but as a tool for creating security. I enrolled in community college courses, business basics, computer skills, real estate principles. At 59, I was the oldest student in most classes, but I didn't care. For the first time in months, I felt like I was moving forward instead of just surviving. The biggest change wasn't financial. It was psychological. I stopped waiting for Amanda to reach out. I stopped checking my phone constantly, hoping for a text. I focused on building a life that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or presence. 6 months after leaving Amanda's apartment, I was living in a small but clean rental house in Round Rock, working part-time as a bookkeeper for Patricia's firm, and taking real estate classes in the evenings. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. That's when Patricia mentioned the property. "There's a small fourplex in North Austin going up for auction," she said during one of our monthly meetings. "The owner defaulted on taxes and it's going cheap. With your insurance money as a down payment and a small business loan, you could afford it." I'd never considered becoming a landlord, but Patricia walked me through the numbers. The rental income would cover the mortgage and maintenance, with enough left over to provide me a modest living. More importantly, I'd own something. I'd have security. The property was on Burnett Road, not far from where Amanda and Derek lived, but far enough that I wouldn't accidentally run into them at the grocery store. I spent 2 sleepless nights thinking about it, then made the call. I was going to bid. The auction was held on a rainy Thursday morning in February. I'd driven by the property several times, noting that it was older but structurally sound. 4 units, currently 3 occupied, decent neighborhood, good bones. I sat in the back of the room, nervous but determined. When the bidding started, I kept my paddle low and my expression neutral. 2 other investors were interested, but they were looking for a flip opportunity. I was looking for a home. When the gavel came down, I was the owner of 2,847 Burnett Road for $185,000. Well within my budget. The previous owner had let maintenance slide, so I spent the next month coordinating repairs. New roof, updated electrical, fresh paint inside and out. I learned about permits and contractors, about tenant rights and property management software. Every day brought a new challenge, but also a new skill. By April, all 4 units were rented to good tenants at market rate. I was officially a businesswoman. The call came on a Tuesday in May. One of my tenants was moving out at the end of the month, and I had a showing scheduled for that afternoon. I was reviewing rental applications when my phone rang. "Hi, is this Margaret about the apartment listing?" My blood went cold. It was Amanda. "Yes," I managed to say, hoping my voice sounded professional rather than shocked. "Great! My husband and I are looking for a place in that area. Could we schedule a showing?" They didn't know. Somehow, Derek and Amanda were looking at apartments, and they'd found my listing without realizing I owned the property. The rental company I used handled most of the tenant interactions, and my name wasn't prominently displayed in the listings. "What's your timeline for moving?" I asked, trying to gather information while my heart pounded. "Pretty immediate. Our current lease is up and rent's going up everywhere. This place seems reasonable for the area. Reasonable." After 8 months of silence, my daughter was calling me a reasonable landlord without realizing it was me. I scheduled the showing for 5 p.m. and spent the rest of the day pacing my house, wondering what I should do. Part of me wanted to cancel, to avoid the awkwardness. Part of me wanted to show up and see the look on their faces. But mostly, I was just curious about who they'd become in the months since they'd asked me to leave. I arrived at the property 15 minutes early and waited in my car. At exactly 5 p.m., Derek's blue Honda pulled into the parking lot. I watched them get out. Amanda looked tired, thinner than I remembered. Derek looked the same, maybe a little more stressed. I waited 5 minutes, then walked to the unit with my clipboard and keys, playing the role of a professional property manager. "Are you the folks interested in Unit C?" I asked as I approached. Amanda looked up and I saw the exact moment she recognized me. Her face went white, then red, then she grabbed Derek's arm. "Mom," she whispered. Derek spun around, confusion turning to understanding, then to something that looked like anger. "What the hell is this?" I kept my voice level. "This is a rental showing. Would you like to see the apartment?" "You've got to be kidding me," Derek said. "This is some kind of setup." "Actually, it's a coincidence," I said, which was mostly true. "But you're here, and I have an apartment to show. Would you like to see it or not?" Amanda was staring at me like she'd seen a ghost. "You own this building?" "I do." Derek stepped forward. "Since when do you own property?" "Last time we saw you, you were living in a motel." "Things change," I said simply. "Would you like to see the apartment?" Amanda nodded slowly. Derek rolled his eyes but followed us to the door. The apartment was nice. I'd made sure of that. Hardwood floors, updated kitchen, good natural light. I went through my standard presentation, pointing out features, explaining lease terms, answering questions about utilities and parking. Amanda was quiet, but I could see her taking everything in. Derek asked pointed questions about rent increases, maintenance response times, pet policies, all the questions a good tenant should ask. "The rent is $1,400 a month," I said as we finished the tour. "First month, last month, and security deposit due at signing." Derek whistled. "That's more than we're paying now." "It's market rate for this area," I said, "and below market rate for the quality of the renovation." Amanda finally spoke. How long have you owned this place? Since February. She did the math in her head, 3 months after I'd left their apartment. Mom, I don't understand. How did you afford this? I looked at both of them, my daughter who'd chosen silence over support, and her husband who'd made me feel like a burden for existing. Life insurance money from your father. I invested it wisely. Derek's expression shifted to something I'd never seen before. Surprise, maybe even respect. You bought this whole building? With help from a financial advisor and a business loan, yes. We stood there in awkward silence for a moment. Then Derek asked, "What happens now?" Do we pretend we don't know each other? I considered the question seriously. That depends. Are you interested in renting the apartment? What if we are? Amanda asked. Then you fill out an application like everyone else. I check your credit, verify your income, contact your previous landlords. If you qualify, you sign a lease. Derek laughed, but not in a mean way. Previous landlords? That would be our current landlord who's raising our rent because he can. Market forces, I said. They affect everyone. Amanda looked around the apartment one more time. It's beautiful, Mom. You did a really good job with the renovation. Thank you. But I don't think this would work, she continued. It would be too complicated mixing family and business. I nodded. That's probably wise. Derek surprised me by extending his hand. Congratulations, Margaret. Seriously, this is impressive. I shook his hand. Thank you. As they walked to their car, Amanda turned back. Mom, could we maybe get coffee sometime? Not about the apartment, just to talk? I thought about it for a moment. I'd like that. We met at a Starbucks on Lamar the following Saturday. Amanda was nervous, fidgeting with her cup, starting sentences she couldn't finish. I waited patiently. I've been thinking about you a lot, she finally said, wondering how you were doing, if you were okay. I'm doing well, I said. I can see that, the apartment building. It's really impressive. I had no idea you were interested in real estate. I wasn't until I needed to be. She winced. Mom, about what happened? Amanda, I interrupted gently. You don't need to apologize. Yes, I do. We made you leave. We made you feel unwanted. That was wrong. I sipped my coffee, choosing my words carefully. You made a choice about what kind of household you wanted to maintain. I understand that choice, even if it hurt. Derek was stressed about money, about space, about everything. He felt like having you there was a reminder that we weren't successful enough to have our own place without roommates. Even if the roommate was your mother? Amanda's eyes filled with tears, especially because it was my mother. He felt like it made him look like he couldn't take care of his wife. I'd never thought about it that way, that my presence might have threatened Derek's sense of masculinity and success. It didn't excuse how he'd treated me, but it explained it. What about you? I asked. How did you feel about it? Conflicted, she admitted. I wanted to help you, but I also wanted my marriage to work. I thought maybe if you had some space to grieve and figure things out, we could all start fresh later. And now? Now I realize that asking your widowed mother to leave so you can preserve your marriage dynamic is probably not the choice a good daughter makes. I reached across the table and took her hand. You're a good daughter, Amanda. You're also a wife trying to hold her marriage together. Sometimes those roles conflict. She squeezed my hand. How are you not angry with me? Who says I'm not? I said, and she looked startled. I was furious for months, hurt, betrayed, confused. I felt like I'd raised a stranger. And now I understand that you're human. You made a choice that protected what felt most important to you at the time. It wasn't the choice I would have made, but it was yours to make. We talked for 2 hours. She told me about her marriage, her job stress, her fears about the future. I told her about the property, about my classes, about learning to live independently. We didn't fix everything, but we started to rebuild something real. Amanda and Derek found an apartment in South Austin, closer to Derek's job. They seemed happier there, with more space and a shorter commute. Amanda and I met for coffee every few weeks, sometimes talking about the past, more often talking about the present. Derek and I maintained a cordial distance. He'd been polite during our apartment showing, even respectful, but we both understood that our relationship would never be warm. That was okay. Not every relationship needs to be close to be functional. My property business grew slowly but steadily. I bought a second small building in Pflugerville, then partnered with Patricia to flip a house in Manor. I wasn't getting rich, but I was building something solid, something that belonged to me. The biggest change wasn't financial, it was internal. I'd spent most of my adult life defining myself through my relationships with other people. I was Robert's wife, Amanda's mother, Derek's inconvenient mother-in-law. Now I was Margaret, the property owner, Margaret, the businesswoman, Margaret, the woman who'd rebuilt her life from nothing. 1 year after that awkward apartment showing, Amanda called me with news. She and Derek were getting divorced. Not because of me, she was quick to clarify, but because they'd grown apart and wanted different things from life. "I keep thinking about that day at your apartment," she said during one of our coffee meetings. "The way you handled it when Derek and I showed up. You could have been vindictive or petty, but you were just professional, dignified." "What would being petty have accomplished?" I asked. "Nothing. But it would have felt satisfying in the moment." "Momentary satisfaction isn't worth much," I said. "Building something lasting is—" Amanda moved into a small house near campus. We had dinner every Sunday, a tradition we'd never had when she was married. She started dating a teacher named Marcus, who treated her with kindness and respect. Life, as it turns out, went on. Derek moved to Dallas for work. I heard through Amanda that he'd gotten engaged to someone he'd met online. I hoped she was happy, and I hoped he'd learned something from our family's complicated dynamic. As for me, I bought a small house in Cedar Park, not far from where Robert and I had lived when Amanda was growing up. I kept the rental properties but hired a management company to handle the day-to-day operations. I wanted to be a property owner, not a full-time landlord. People ask me if I feel vindicated, if having Amanda and Derek unknowingly inquire about renting from me felt like revenge. The truth is, it didn't feel like revenge at all. It felt like growth. The woman who'd left their apartment with 2 suitcases and wounded pride would have been devastated by their reaction. The woman who'd owned that building for 3 months wasn't devastated. She was curious. She was in control. She was strong enough to separate personal hurt from professional opportunity. That's the real victory. Not that I ended up financially comfortable, not that Amanda and I rebuilt our relationship, not even that Derek learned to respect me. The real victory was that I learned to respect myself. I'd spent 30-plus years as a supporting character in other people's stories. When those people decided they didn't need that character anymore, I thought the story was over. Instead, I discovered that I'd always been the protagonist of my own story. I just hadn't been paying attention. Today, Amanda and I have a relationship that's more honest than it's ever been. We don't pretend that what happened didn't hurt. We don't pretend that trust, once broken, rebuilds itself automatically. But we're both trying, and that's enough. Derek and I exchange polite greetings at Amanda's birthday parties and holiday gatherings. We're never going to be close, but we don't need to be. He's part of Amanda's past, and I'm part of her present and future. As for me, I'm 60 years old, financially stable, socially connected, and emotionally whole. I own property, I have investments, I take art classes at the community center, and I volunteer at a women's shelter on weekends. I've built a life that doesn't depend on anyone else's presence or approval. The motel room where I spent those dark months has been torn down, replaced by a shopping center. Sometimes I drive by and remember the woman I was then, lost, ashamed, certain that her useful life was over. I wish I could tell her what I know now, that being discarded isn't the end of your story unless you let it be. That sometimes The best thing that can happen to you is learning that you don't need anyone else to save you. Because once you know that, once you really understand it in your bones, you become someone who can't be easily broken again. And that, more than any property deed or bank balance, is the kind of security that lasts. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe for more real-life stories of resilience and transformation. And remember, you're stronger than you know, even when life tries to convince you otherwise.